So everybody, I want to welcome Matt Ruff, depending on where you're at. You can see him right here. I'm looking at him here. The author and creator of Lovecraft Country, which is a amazing book. And I absolutely love the artwork on the front of this, even though it's reversed. The tentacles are hoods of KKK members, which is just amazingly done. I love the look of that. So thank you, Matt, for joining me today.
Thank you. And I should just say, yeah, the artist was Jared Taylor, who is one of my favorites. He just does really amazing work. So yeah, all props to him.
Oh, it's just so great. And I love the weathering. It makes it look like a classic pulp novel, and
it's even
so
better
great.
in hardcover. Yeah, it looks like a book you pulled out of your granddad's attic, and it's like, oh, what's this? Yeah, so it's neat. It's very neat.
It's so good. I'm so excited for the series. And I am going to pick your brain unmercifully with this interview
Okay.
because I've just like, oh, he did something great here. And so first off, I love the fact that you took the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who has influenced so many people. The mythology is so great. And you didn't shy away from the fact. In fact, that's part of the thing here that makes this such a perfect mix, that, you know, he had some problematic beliefs, we can say.
He was a white
supremacist.
Yeah.
But that's what I loved about this, is that you took that, you didn't shy away from it. Within the first chapter, you talk about it. Within the first pages, you talk about it. What was the balancing of that like in terms of the story, where, you know, you're doing an homage to this man's legacy for his work, but you kept ingrained in here the fact that he was a supremacist?
Well, I mean, it's funny because, I mean, in a way, Lovecraft came into the book through the back door. I mean, my original idea was to do something more like the X-Files, where you would have a recurring cast of characters having, you know, weekly paranormal adventures. And the difference being that instead of being about white FBI agents in the 1990s, this was going to be a story about a black family who owned a travel agency in the 1950s. And so part of what I was trying to capture there was sort of the longstanding difficulty that black nerds have had at loving a genre of fiction that doesn't love them back and doesn't have a place for them. So part of the function of Lovecraft in the story is to sort of encapsulate as quickly as possible this difficulty. I mean, there are plenty of other authors I could have picked for that, but he's somebody who sort of combines both this sort of classic paranormal horror that a lot of people love with this very nasty white supremacist attitude that is, I think, a lot of white readers just overlook, or you just sort of like, oh, it's like my uncle, you know, he talks that way sometimes, but so what? And then if you're a black reader, particularly somebody in the 50s, mm-hmm. encountering that, how do you balance that? So it was less about taking Lovecraft to task and just sort of trying to capture the difficulty that someone like my main character Atticus had as a kid, where loves this stuff, wants to be able to love it unreservedly, and then, you know, when his dad finds out what he's reading, in addition to all the other problems that nerds traditionally have explaining their interest to their parents, he's got to say, well, yeah, I know he's like this, but this is still why I like him. And the dad's being like, are you kidding me with this? You know? So yeah, it wasn't a matter of being courageous. It was just like, that was kind of the whole point of bringing that in, was to sort of deal with that contradiction and that tough balance that people had. And then Lovecraft does serve as sort of this bridge between the two concerns of the book, which are, on the one hand, there are real monsters and, you know, sorcerers and what have you, but there's also just the reality of Jim Crow racism, you know, where there's redlining, there's segregation, there's all the other problems that people had as African Americans in the 1950s, and you know, like, which is the bigger threat to your safety or sanity, you know, the thing under the bed or the white policeman who stops you in a lonely stretch of highway right before dark. So
oh yeah, no, I love that, you know, I love that you combined, like, you do a great, it's all about balance with this book. You do a fantastic job with the story of balancing that horror, like the duality of the horror that these characters have to deal with. And it's true. It's like, okay, which, this monster that looks like a little rock that can eat me with one chomp, or, the guy with the shotgun that's grinning at me really, really strangely and
Yeah.
dubiously. Who do I go with? And I think I'll take my chances with the rock. It's like,
well, and also it's a weird balance, because in a way, I mean, I remember one person I was talking to, I think it was a reviewer, was just saying, like, what was weird to me was how matter of factly the family was when they started dealing with stuff like haunted houses. And they're like, well, their lives are pretty surreal already anyway. So there's a sense in which just the mechanisms they've dealt to cope with the fact that they're not even real full citizens in their home country, in a way makes it much easier to deal with. Yeah, I bought a house that's turned out to be haunted, but I'm already planning to deal with my neighbors wanting to burn the house down to get me out of here. So this is just one more problem on the pile. And so it again, there is definitely that balance, but they just sort of played off each other in a way that was really interesting writing about it. And then trying to make the story, it's not about suffering, it's about the courageous and very clever ways that the characters come up with to deal with this stuff and have actual triumphs as they go along. So yeah, I try to make it an honest book, but also a hopeful one where you're not just wallowing in misery for 300 pages.
Well, and I tell you, I love the fact, one thing that you kind of just made me think of, a question for you, is the fact that you do such a great job utilizing the spirituality of these characters as sort of their armor, especially Letitia and she's like my favorite character. You probably get that a lot. She's like the best. I love Atticus too, but Letitia's she just does not care. She's like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. And she's so matter-of-factly deals with it because she has this armor of her own strength of soul and will.
Well, yeah, I mean, Letitia was a lot of fun to write. She's the, I mean, I guess in like Buffy the Vampire Slayer terms, she's almost like the Cordelia character, the one who always says what she's thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
And she's also very versatile. Like if she can't sweet talk you or browbeat you to giving her what she wants, she'll find a way to go around you. And yeah, even her spirituality, it's like God is like her co-conspirator. Like, he's looking out for her. He wants her to succeed. And, something good happens to her. Well, that's evidence that God's backing me up on this. And that becomes very important because, she finds herself, after her sister abandons her in the haunted house, she's basically facing down the neighbors and the ghost alone. But because she sort of convinced herself, well, God wants me to have this house, that's how she finds the tenacity to sort of hang out and make that work. So yeah, she was a great character to write, and just, and definitely one who evolved in the writing of the story, just to sort of factor all of that in. So, but all of that, I had fun with all the characters. And I mean, the women were particularly interesting just because they face an additional level of challenge. There's the threat is just more for them. They're more likely to be preyed on, and there's always a sexual element too. If you're a woman alone and you're stopped somewhere, or a bunch of guys approach you, you've got to worry about that on top of everything else. And so it just made it. Their stories have more depth to them too. That added dimension. It just made them really interesting to write for me.
Well, and that's one thing I was going to say, was the equality of characters. You have like you brought up Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but like one of my idols when it comes to writing fiction and being able to do an ensemble correctly and give equal time is Joss Whedon. And you did a Whedon, I'll call it a Whedon here. You were able to give equality to all of these characters. They each have their own story, plus they all come together in the story, including the women, which is really important for me as a woman, but also for women of color to see that they are represented here.
I mean, I've sort of, I mean, this has been for a while in my writing, but I just, at this point in my writing, it's like, if I'm going to have a character in the novel, I kind of want to there has to be enough going on to justify the space they're taking up there. So I want them, both male and female, to be well developed. You can't just have the guys are doing the interesting stuff and then, the wife or the girlfriend or the daughter walks on stage to deliver a couple of lines and then wanders off again. And I mean, another thing I tend to do in my novels, I will often take the character you least expect to matter, that they become one of the most important characters, which in this case is Ruby, who's, when she's introduced, is just sort of like Letitia's long-suffering sister. And you the first time you meet her, you probably assume, okay, she's just going to be a drag on Letitia's fun and hang out in the background. And then later on, you come back to her, and she's got one of the most important roles to play. And partly because I sort of needed somebody who was kind of an outsider to the rest of the group to fill that specific role. But yeah, I just like doing that. And again, so much of the fun of the writing to me is to get in the characters' heads and try to develop them. So it just wouldn't be, I'm constantly thinking, okay, if I'm going to pull this guy in, what can I do to make them matter and give them a little more depth? And so and so women are going to be a part of that, obviously.
Yeah, it's just, you do such a great job with it and with all the characters, and that's one thing I definitely wanted to ask. And this is me picking at your brain again, because I write fiction too, and I want all of your talent.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just gonna steal it through this video. Where did you draw inspiration for these characters from? What kind of research did you do for them to make them, for the time frame, and also for those for the kind of challenges that went on for people of color back then?
I mean, a lot of it was just historical research that I read a lot about the laws of the time. I mean, one of the first books that I sort of fed into this was a book by James Lowen called Sundown Towns, which is a history of whites-only communities in America that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff I really was not fully aware of. That's where I first heard about the Green Book, this whole concept of, specific travel guides for Black travelers that told them where they could go and be safe. And it's where I first heard about the Tulsa massacre, this horrific incident in 1921 where the white citizens of Tulsa basically burned down this prosperous Black neighborhood and killed about 300 people. And so Atticus's family, they're originally from there. They came up to Chicago after their home was basically destroyed. And just other things like the fact that racism was a nationwide phenomenon. It wasn't, we tend to associate historical segregation with the South, but really it was everywhere. It was just the South was open and honest about it, whereas in the North, people would lie to you about maybe why they weren't going to rent you a room, but you were still in just as much danger there.
Polite racism.
More like, it's like the difference was that in the South, Black labor was openly exploited, so it was okay that Black folks were around as long as they knew their place. Right. In the North and the West, this weird thing happened after the Civil War, where as Black families started to emigrate into the North, white folks basically decided, we don't want these people around, and it just was this weird contagion where they would, town after town would just sort of evict all of its Black residents, and which is why you have all these people living in very small areas in the cities, even though they'd come from, farms in the South. You would expect them to then go and have farms of their own up north. And the reason they tried that, but a lot of them got chased out by white residents who didn't want them around. So a lot of it was things like that, learning about the real history that has been suppressed or forgotten. And then, I read about a year's worth of back issues of the Chicago Defender, which was the historic Black newspaper in Chicago, that sort of gave me a sense of what the topics of the time were in 1954, what were people thinking about, and so forth. And I read some memoirs from the period, and that was enough to sort of give me a sense of, what the environment my characters were living in was going to be like and what their backstory might be. And then from there, it was just the same approach I generally take with characters, where I sort of have a general sense of, what everyone's personality is kind of like and how they relate to each other and what I need them to do. And then I start writing, and as I go along, I will encounter, plot points in the story. I know why I want somebody to do something, but I need to figure out why they would do it. And in answering that question, I'll learn something more about them and what makes them tick, and they will become more three-dimensional as I go along. And the goal being to have this, every character be psychologically realistic and believable in what they do, even if they're doing something that's impossible. Like, okay, why would Hippolyta go out to, the middle of the Wisconsin woods at night alone? And, she thinks she's going to find an abandoned astronomical observatory. Then she gets there and she finds that it doesn't just look at the stars. Most of us at that point would turn around and leave. Why does she keep going? And the answer is, well, I know her backstory. I know by telling you the story of how she got there and who she is, I'll make you understand why she has to take that additional step and go through the doorway. And, and same thing with, Montrose and George. It's like, okay, how am I going to leverage? What would the bad guys use to like coerce them to break into a museum after dark and risk their lives retrieving this book? Like, what can they take from them? Things like that. As it's just a matter of, not confusing my own agenda of what I need to happen with the actual motivations of the characters. It's like, I need to know why they would do these things. And that's basically that, and a lot of thought and time and practice. I've been doing this for 35 years now. So it gets easier as you go along.
Do you hear the characters talk to you? Do you hear their voices?
Not exactly. I do when I'm writing the dialogue, but it's more a matter of, okay, what would so-and-so be thinking here? Why would, and eventually it will come to me. So it's like I'm their psychologist or their psychiatrist trying to figure out, okay, what makes you tick? Let me, and eventually, I'll come up with a good answer, or what I hope is a good answer. So.
That's great insight. So the timeliness of the show and the book, the book that was released in, I believe, 2016.
Yeah.
Which was kind of the start of our ridiculousness in this country. Yeah. Ironically enough. So the timeliness cannot be overstated on this, especially with the show now coming. And can you talk about how that's sort of making you re-look at this book, and also how you hope the series kind of helps talk to you where these problems came from originally?
The timing is less coincidental than you'd think, because the thing is, it's like, I keep thinking about this. It seems really timely, and it's true this year in particular. It just seems like a perfect storm of this stuff. But if you look back over, you could have done this any time in the past. Going back all the way to 1954, you could have had a story like this, and there would have been stuff in American culture that would have made it seem timely. We go through, moments where we're more focused and more honest about the fact that, there are these things like horrific police brutality and so many other problems, the legacies of legal segregation in the country. But that stuff never goes away. It's just people stop paying attention. People have the luxury to not pay attention to it. Will stop paying attention to it for a while. But, people get murdered by the police a lot, and I think, I'm old enough to remember the Rodney King beatings back in the 90s. So, there may seem to be a little bit of luck in the timing, but really it's just, the stuff has always been here, and it's just a question of, are we willing to talk about it? So, and if the series gives people an additional framework or inspires them to go back and look at the history, I think that's great. I find I am a better storyteller if I don't think too hard about, trying to convey some sort of deeper message on top of that. I prefer to let that sort of evolve organically through the story. And obviously one thing about it is because I speak matter-of-factly about a lot of the stuff that people don't even know about, at the very least, in the novel, it will probably inspire readers to say, okay, is that really true? Did that really happen? And you can go and look it up, and yeah, it did. So perhaps the HBO series will have the same effect. And I, from what I know, I mean, I think they're taking the basic framework of the novel and expanding on it even more. So there may be additional references to historical events that I don't even get into that they will talk about as well. And again, that will be something that, you know, viewers may want to go and look into more. Like I remember when Watchmen came out last year, and that was the first a lot of other people had ever heard of the Tulsa massacre. Yeah. And I'm sure that's gonna, you know, that will be a feature of this series as well. The interesting thing about that being, it's funny too, though, people have a way of glomming onto one incident where the reason we remember the Tulsa massacre to the extent that we do, even to that slight extent that we do, is that it wasn't successful in terms of the ultimate goal of the white people in that case was to drive the black population of Tulsa out of town, and it was just too big a job. They destroyed most of the district, but people rebuilt and they stayed, and the story was covered up afterwards. But the really creepy thing is that this was going on all over the country in smaller ways. There were a lot of other towns where you'd have a smaller set to, maybe there would be 20, 30 black residents, and just one day they'd be told, you need to leave. And this is why today, you know, when you drive across the country, there are whole states and, you know, regions that we think of as black people don't live there for some reason. And you know, that if you don't know the history, the immediate thought is, well, maybe they just didn't like the climate in Montana, or, you know, maybe Idaho, you know, it's just the weather there is not good. And it's like, no, these were areas where it was just too dangerous. And that's one of the things in the book Sundown Towns. James Lowen looks at the census data, and you can actually see all of these different states and counties, this decline where there's a period, it starts around 1890, where you have a certain number of black families registered, and it just starts to drop drastically in certain parts of the country. And what's happening is people are quietly being driven out and forced to go live in the cities, because that's really the only place they can be safe. And then that just gets forgotten, and people make up stories for why black folks don't want to live here. And yeah, so that's the kind of thing that, you know, fictional stories like this can inspire you to learn more about, I guess. But it's really, that's the thing though. Fiction ultimately is no substitute for a good and well-researched history book. All it can do is sort of get your interest and point the way, and make you think, well, what's the underpinning of this? So.
Well, and I actually grew up next to Anna, Illinois, which has been in the news lately because I literally lived 30 minutes away from there.
Yeah.
And the area that I lived in, the school district that I went to for my whole life, never had until my senior year, one individual person of color in the school, like one black person. That was it. My entire school life. Never had anybody of color there. And it was like, well, I asked one time why, and a friend of mine said, because they burned them out of town.
Yeah, Lowen talks about that as well. That was a famous incident. I forget the exact details, but I know there was like a real.
Oh, Anna has a history, and that name actually has a very.
Yeah, I know. We won't say that.
Yeah, we won't say that, but that.
I know what you mean though. Yeah. Yeah, there are, I mean, Southern Illinois generally has got some really nasty stories in it. And Indiana as well, as you get closer, particularly as you get closer to the Mason-Dixon line.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, there's another incident in the novel that's actually based on a real life incident where Atticus and his father go to a fictional town called Aiken, which is, you know, in my novel is like right on the river near the south of Illinois. And they meet a lawyer there for the NAACP whose neighbor has put up a sign, you know, basically outing him as a Negro lover and pointing a sign at the house so that people going by will know which house to throw stones at. And there was a real guy in Cairo, Illinois, who was a lawyer for the NAACP who I think it was David Lansden was his name. And he desegregated the local school system, or helped desegregate the local school system. And so his neighbor did put up a neon arrow on his garage roof so that people would know which house to throw stones at. And Life magazine had an article where the guy had a collection of all the rocks that came through his window and people would dump trash on his lawn and dump oil on his stairs. And
yeah.
I'm amazed that he stayed, but that was the thing, is like guys like that were, the rare exception but it explained why more people didn't stand up, because you would be ostracized by your own community. And while I would like to think that guy, got to go on and live a happy life, it's entirely possible he just, he spent the rest of his life suffering because of what he had done. And it just took incredible courage, so.
Well, and now Cairo is like dying. That's
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen pictures of it. Yeah, that's amazing.
There's a whole documentary that some guys from the UK did about it that just literally talks about how this robust town has just rotted, and people are still there because they can't afford to go anywhere else. But boy, didn't that wonderful attitude that you guys had help you out so much. It's horrifying. And you kind of answered the another question that I had for you, which is using the horror genre and science fiction and using these stories, because that's one thing I always love seeing, are writers that take these genres and use them. Like Rod Serling is always the one I go to about it, because he's like the god, he's up there, using these stories and genres to talk about things that people don't want to talk about. Roddenberry did it. In Star Trek. Can you talk about the importance of genre as a tool for you as a writer to get across what you want to convey?
I mean, I actually feel a lot of the time now is like I think it was more important back when they were doing it, because there were literally limits on what you could say on television. Right. Now, a lot of the time I feel like that's actually, if I want to talk about a specific, historic incident, I don't need to use a metaphor for that. I can just talk about it. Or if I want to talk about racism, I can just talk about it. But what I like about genre is I just love it for its own sake. And I certainly, I think hybrid works are wonderful, where you combine realism with a more fantastic element. My novels are all over the map in terms of subject matter, but I usually find a way to draw in some sort of fantastic or wild element like that, just because I enjoy it and because it enriches the story, to have it work on multiple levels that way. So it's not so much that I feel like I need it to get into these subjects. It's just that it lets you do more interesting things along the way. So but yeah, I feel like we're certainly freer in what we're able to do now than they were. So it's in some ways I try to avoid. I don't go metaphorical unless I really, really have to, because I think in a lot of cases it's more important to speak plainly if you want to explain something, because that's the other problem with the one risk with the fantastical elements, is that you can force a happy ending or a solution to a problem that doesn't really have an easy solution. So you can't just magically, like, you can't just say this. Well, you can, but you probably shouldn't just say, well, this is a really difficult problem, but here's the magical solution. And it's like, I don't MacGuffin. Know. Yeah, to me, that's sort of cheating, and it's not as interesting. It's like, if you want to grapple with something, then grapple with it and be honest about the difficulty you're facing. So, but if you want to throw in some vampires or a haunted house along the way, hey, that's cool.
I just add a little bit of spice. It's all good.
Yep.
So I had asked everyone. I'd asked if there was any questions for you, fan questions, and I actually have one from Joshua Pruitt. It was such a great book, but was so surprised to hear you had intended for it to be a TV pitch before writing the novel. Once it had been an option for TV and development with such a stellar team had started it, how did the new show differ from your initial dream of the series, and how did it grow, evolve, and contract?
So yeah, I originally pitched this in 2007.
Wow.
I was invited by some TV people to, they were fans of my work and invited me to submit original pitches. And one of the ideas I came up with was Lovecraft Country, and they didn't go for it. And it may just be that I wasn't the best pitch person for it. It may have been that the idea of a story with a Black ensemble cast like this that would have been very expensive to produce, it may have been just a little too early for TV to want to gamble on that. I can't really say, but I really loved the idea and I wanted to do something with it. So I decided to try and figure out a way to make it work as a novel. And the trickiest aspect of that was I wanted to maintain this sense of, taking classic old horror and weird tale stories and sort of retelling them with Black protagonists in the 50s, and seeing how that changed them, and using that as a sort of a way to comment and engage with the more realistic issues of the day. And but I didn't want to write a book of short stories. So eventually what I ended up doing, what the novel really is the literary equivalent of binge watching
It is.
the first season of an imaginary TV show. And so, most of the chapters are about 10,000 words long, with the exception of the first chapter, which is like the pilot. So that's longer. And then Ruby's chapter, which is sort of the Sweeps Week special episode with all kinds of amazing revelations. And in the back of my head, there was this idea, okay, I'll do this, and at least I'll have some version of the story that I can be happy with. But yes, maybe the book can also be a proof of concept that this is something that could work as a series. So, and of course, I didn't ever believe it would work out quite this well. And what happened was my timing for once was really good. The book was published right around the time Jordan Peele was finishing up Get Out, and he was looking for his next project, and somebody, I still don't know who, sent him a copy. And so my CA agent called me up and said, Jordan Peele wants to talk to you, which is kind of surprising because he's mostly known for comedy, but apparently he's looking to break into horror. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll talk to him. And it was me and Jordan and Misha Green, the showrunner, and she'd also done Underground, which is an amazing show. We were all on the phone together, and it was a really good conversation because, sometimes when you talk to people from Hollywood, it's like they've read a different book than the one you wrote. And in this case, we were talking about the same story, and we were all excited about it for the same reason. And so right away, I was just like, if they can swing this, these are definitely the right folks to do this, to turn this into a series. And it wasn't long after that conversation that the trailer to Get Out dropped. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay,
this all makes sense now.
I know why Jordan's interested in this. And the other thing that was great was that I could tell even from the trailer that Get Out was going to be enormously successful, and that would probably grease the skids for, getting the series greenlit. And again, even then I didn't expect this to happen, but HBO was basically like, yes, do this. And we're not even going to bother making you do the pilot first. We're just going to let you do the whole first season. We're going to greenlight the whole thing right away. And so, so I'm still waiting for like the bad luck to come to balance that out. Like I'm going to get hit by a bus the day before the series airs. But so as far as I was not directly involved in the day-to-day production of the series. Like I've seen some stuff during my set visits where I sort of can speculate about what's going to happen. I still can't talk about a lot of it, but so I can't really point for point discuss what's different between the novel and the book, partly because I mostly just don't know yet, but also because even the stuff I do know, I probably shouldn't talk about. But just looking at the trailers, it strikes me that it will be fairly faithful to the novel. Although
I saw things I recognized in the trailer.
It's like 90%. It's the story that I know, but from a slightly parallel universe where a few things are different and nothing looks quite the way I imagined, and but it's just really cool, and I love that because this way the novel and the series can sort of complement each other, and it's like one is not just a copy of the other. That's always less. Totally faithful adaptations are usually pretty boring to me. I like it when there's enough variation that you can get something good out of both, even after you're familiar with them both. So, and I think that's going to be the case here. And then as far as if we're lucky enough to have a second season, where they will go from there, I couldn't say. But so far, I'm really hopeful and excited about it. But I honestly don't really know too much about what's going to be changed. I think it will be very, very faithful in spirit, though, to the novel.
Amazing. Yeah, and I just have to say, I screamed a little bit when I saw Cthulhu show up in the trailer.
Yeah.
I was like, there he is.
Assuming that's actually Cthulhu and not just something that kind of looks like him, but we don't know. That's one of the things
he's Cthulhu.
I'm fine with that. So,
So I know I got to wrap this up because we went over a little bit, but I've had so much fun talking to you
I have
about
too. No, this is fine.
this has been so great. So I'm going to be selfish with this last question because
Sure.
again, I said I try to be a writer and I'm always curious how you help yourself in a routine. What is your routine when you write? What do you do to try and keep yourself focused? Because that's one of the biggest challenges I've always found, to make myself sit down and do it.
I mean, the most important thing for me, I'm a very undisciplined person.
Yay.
You know, my German forebears would be very, very unhappy with my work ethic. So the main thing for me is just to make sure I, you know, set a schedule and stick to it. And I find I get the most work done when I, you know, first thing in the morning, I've turned into my father in my old age, where I wake up at 4 a.m. and, you know, when I was a kid, I could never understand why anybody would do that voluntarily. But now it's like, yeah, I wake up before sunset, before the rest of the world is awake, and go into my room. And, you know, if I start writing right away, don't check the internet, don't mess around with email, I can, you know, just basically set my head to the idea that I'm going to get something done today. Then, you know, I'll get something substantial done before breakfast, you know, and then my wife, who also works at home, we have breakfast together, chat a little bit, then I go back. And if I've started working, then I will continue working through, you know, the morning. And if I don't do that, if I get up and I say, well, I'm just going to goof around a little bit first, you know, maybe play a little bit of this video game, then that sets the tone for the day where I
Oh,
don't get
yeah.
anything done. So that, and it is, I've also found it's very helpful to have deadlines, where not just self-set deadlines, but deadlines that other people will be very disappointed if I don't meet them. So it's useful that I'm at a point now where I can sell novels as partials, where I will, you know, I'll write the first 100 pages, show it to my publisher, and they'll say, yes, we'll publish this. You know, you've got until X date to deliver it. And having that hard deadline where I know these people have paid me money in advance and they're, you know, they're expecting me to deliver, that gets me disciplined as well. So those are the two biggest things, are just knowing that, yeah, if I work first thing in the morning, that'll set the tone of the day. And also just having this idea in my head, you know, if you screw around, you're not going to make that deadline, which is coming faster than you think. So
Yeah, deadlines are not my friend at all in any shape or form.
it's unfortunate that, I mean, I you know, there's these people like Stephen King, who is apparently, I don't know if he still does it, but he used to do like 6 pages a day, like clockwork, even on holidays. And
And he writes
I
books.
I know, I know. I mean, oh well, and that's why he owns a baseball team and I don't. But yeah, it's a thing. But the other thing is too, I try to take my time and think things through. But so being a slow writer actually has benefited me in a lot of ways as well. But if I were more disciplined, I could probably have cut the time enough that I would have more than 7 novels to my credit at this age. So
but you have a Nintendo Switch in your hand, and
there you go.
And Animal Crossing is here, and you know.
And that's that's the legacy you leave behind.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. How many bells did you earn? I've got 10,000. How many books did you write?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I want to give you a chance to pimp whatever you've got upcoming other than this, because even though we all know about this and love it, what else do you have, and where can we find you online?
Well, if you look behind this ear here, you can see, oops, my image is reversed. So anyway, it's called 88 Names. This is my latest novel, just came out in March, and it is a completely different, as is normal for me. It's like completely different than Lovecraft Country. It's set about 20 years in the future. The protagonist, John Chu, is what's known as a Sherpa, which is basically an online guide to role-playing games. So
Oh, wow.
So say you want to play the futuristic version of World of Warcraft, but you don't have 200 hours to build up, you know, a character. So what you can do is you can hire John Chu and his team, and they will provide you with a ready-made high-level character with cool weapons and armor and a team of experienced players to come with you and basically cater an adventure for you. And this all takes place in virtual reality because it's reached a point where it actually works the way it's advertised. And so anyway, he gets a new client who prefers to remain anonymous, who goes by the name of Mr. Jones, who's offering him $100,000 a week to give him a comprehensive tour of the world of virtual reality gaming. Yeah, and it's one of those things where you're like, this is too good to be true, but the guy's willing to pay the first week in advance and the money is real. So John Chu takes the job, but he's obviously curious. And basically he comes to believe that Mr. Jones is actually Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, who's
that took a turn.
Yeah, who's apparently interested in virtual reality for reasons that don't have anything to do with entertainment. And again, so the first 2/3 of the novel are set entirely in virtual reality, either in virtual chat rooms or in some kind of gaming environment. And so everybody has total control over how they look and sound. You can use machine translation to pass yourself off as a native speaker of a language you've never studied. And most of the people John Chu is interacting with, including his coworkers and even his ex-girlfriend, are people he's never met in real life. And obviously somebody gives you their name, you can look them up on social media, but social media lies too. So it's this constant guessing game of who he's really dealing with and what they really want. And Kim Jong-un may be involved. So it's and at the end of the novel, we come out into the real world and you get to get the answer to the mystery, but a lot of it is just this cool cat and mouse game in cyberspace. So
that sounds amazing, and I'm getting that next. That
well,
great.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Matt, thank you again. This has been fantastic.
Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And Lovecraft Country starts this month.
August 16th. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Hard to believe.
I know. All right. Well, thank you again. And check out HBO Max and HBO for Lovecraft Country. And go buy the book if you haven't read it yet, because it is great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You have a great one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.